And I'm just here to introduce Naomi Moir. This session is about professional development of teachers, and it's called Does Practice Make Perfect? The session will draw on research done by Catherine Walter and Jessica Briggs on behalf of Oxford University Press, and report on the question, what professional development makes the most difference to teachers? Naomi Moir has been involved in education for 20 years and has worked with students and teachers from a wide range of environments, including those in the state sector and the private sector. She's published a book with OUP called Starting and Ending Lessons, and is now the Professional Development Services Manager who's responsible for delivering and developing training to English language teachers around the world on behalf of OUP. I'd now like to call upon Naomi to lead the session.
I'm not very good at standing behind podiums and lecterns, so I'm going to try and, because I'm not very good at standing still, so I feel a little bit trapped if I'm behind one of those. So I'm going to have my notes there and I'm going to try and move around. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for coming to the after lunch session. I know it's tempting to go and have a lie down. So I hope that I will keep you engaged and that what we're going to talk about today will be of interest and of value to you. As was mentioned in the introduction, I work for Oxford University Press, and I have the great privilege of working with teachers in different parts of the world, teachers and teacher educators, and continually learning myself through that interaction and through those opportunities, which is great. I was here last year for this conference, and so I'm very pleased to be able to come back and experience it again because it was such a positive experience for me last time. So we're talking about professional development, and we're talking about does practice make perfect? So I want to start by looking at your experiences of learning new things. So I want you to take a moment to talk with somebody near you, maybe introduce yourself if you don't already know each other, and think about and talk about a skill or an activity that you have learned. It doesn't have to be something you've learned recently. It could be something you learned a long time ago, but it shouldn't be English language teaching related. So maybe you learned how to swim, or you can remember learning to ride a bike, or maybe you learned how to cook or sew. So take a moment, think about that skill or activity you've learned, and with a partner, talk about how did you learn it? What was the process? What happened? Who was with you? Did you have support, or did you self-teach? And was it successful in that learning process? Okay, so just take a moment with someone near you. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there, even though you might just be getting going with your stories. And I'm going to share a little story of mine. It's hard to imagine in this weather here, at the moment, of course, but I'm going to tell you a story of me learning to snowboard. I haven't done it for a while, so I think I would have to learn again now. But the first time I went with somebody else who didn't know how to snowboard. We went together, we thought, let's give it a try, let's see. This is how I spent most of my day. Like this, or just like this, going, how do the others do it? They're all doing it, why can't I do it? I spent a lot of that day on my bottom, falling over, getting very frustrated, to the point where halfway down, I took off the snowboard and said, that's it, I'm walking. I walked down the rest of the mountain and sat and had a hot chocolate and watched other people swoop in at great speed, thinking, it's impossible, I don't know how they do it. So quite bruised, ego and body, and certainly frustrated. The second time I went with some people who knew how to do it. And despite the fact that I still spent a lot of the day on my backside and falling over, there were slightly fewer bruises. And by the end of that day, I was actually able to do not the whole mountain, but certainly stretches of the mountain without falling over. I felt I had succeeded. There was success there, progress at very least. And I did go a few more times and continued to improve from that point. So, slightly off, but it wasn't 10 years experience, but I think this quote is an interesting one. And in fact, I think I heard Penny Earr say this about 15 years ago at a conference, and I've held on to it in the back of my mind ever since. But the question that this raises, does practice make perfect? I could have spent 10 days doing that. And I guess I would have improved a little bit over that time, but much, I don't know. And maybe I would have learnt a load of bad habits at the same time. Alternatively, a shorter period of time with some instruction and some guidance, and I think I made a lot more progress. So I didn't just repeat. I moved forward in my progress. So, before we ask that question, think about your experiences that you were talking about before. Was it 10 years of practice, repeated, or were you doing maybe one good year with input and support and making progress? So again, with a partner, have a quick chat. How was your progress? Was it supported, and did you make good progress, or did you get stuck in the same place in your learning? Have a quick chat with somebody near you. All right. Anybody willing to hold up their hand and say, I think I was having the same practice that wasn't necessarily effective and not making much progress? Who felt that they were learning that way? And what were you learning? Swimming. So it was just the same thing over and over again and not making much progress. Okay. Anybody else in that situation?
Music, I did not make much progress. Music, I tried learning a guitar. Maybe, I don't know why, but I could not progress at all. I left it.
Gave up. That happens a lot. I think. Did you continue with your swimming, or did you give up?
I haven't given up yet.
That's the spirit. That's the spirit. Yeah. Okay, who feels that they actually maybe into that 1 year or one experience or a couple of experiences had the support and the guidance that they needed to actually make progress in that learning? And what were you learning?
It was swimming also.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, my relatives and my friends used to throw me, and I mean, they did everything to help me, but nothing really helped. And by the end, I started like thinking, it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would never learn to swim. And then, like last year, I went to a swimming pool, and with the coach, I learned it in 3-4 days.
Just like that. So after years and years of trying and not really getting anywhere and thinking, you know what, maybe it's just not for me. 3 or 4 days, done. Interesting. Anybody else with a similar experience? Yeah?
I was trying to learn how to sew, how to cross stitch, and I was trying to learn how to sew, how to do cross stitch, and my mom was trying to teach me, and all I'd end up doing was pricking myself. And so I got very frustrated and said, let it be, I don't need to learn, this is not a skill I need.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day my grandmom said, come, let me teach you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a breeze. She said, use a thimble.
So she gave you that small tool that made all the difference in that learning process. Again, you could have ended up with bloody fingers and bruises all over and still no beautiful piece of cross stitch, but with that small change in the input you were receiving, off you went. Interesting. So, what makes professional development effective? We've been talking about personal development so far, but what is it about professional development that allows for or creates an environment where there is the opportunity to succeed? Talk with someone near you again. Can you think of at least 3 factors or 3 things that contribute to successful, effective professional development. Take a moment. All right, I'm interested in hearing a few ideas from the group.
Motivation.
Motivation up here, so intrinsic motivation? Self-motivation. So I'm just going to grab a few ideas. So motivation from there, another idea from up the back? Confidence. Self-confidence, self-belief.
Persistence.
Persistence, yes, another good one. Encouragement, resilience.
And especially interest.
Structured, a plan. Ownership, responsibility for your learning.
Reflecting on our experience.
So reflective professional development.
I think is very important.
A model as well, some sort of an example. Results, so actually achieving something. Yeah.
Congenial environment and infrastructure.
Congenial environment and infrastructure, important factors. There's lots of ideas, yes?
The right know-how.
The right know-how, so from somewhere,
Attitudes.
the right attitude, the right, yeah, good.
Awareness raising and scaffolding.
Awareness raising and scaffolding, so being aware of where you could be, so that you, and then support in getting to where you could be.
Somebody, when, for example, if I'm not aware of what I do not know, how could I develop?
Exactly, if you don't know what you don't know, how can you get any further? Very good point. All really, really good ideas. I have different ones. That's not to say that those ideas aren't good and valid. It just goes to show that there's a lot of different factors that definitely contribute to it. You've all gone for very personal reasons, I think, very individual reasons, which I think are all very valid and very important. Oxford University Press asked Catherine Walter and Jessica Briggs to do some research last year, around this time last year, in fact, about what makes effective professional development. And they researched a number of papers and studies and articles on this topic, and their conclusion was that there were 7 core factors that contribute to professional development being effective and having a positive outcome and a positive influence on the teaching and learning process back in the classroom. And here they are. Choice. Teachers, I'm going to talk about all of these in a little bit more detail, but choice, it being sustained, concrete and classroom-based, so not too abstract, actually going back to that classroom, that there's collaboration, there is support. You talked about infrastructure and planning. They're really important factors. So there is that support network in place. A mentoring and coaching element is important. And we talked about the swimmer who, once she went off to a coach, success. Yeah? And outside expertise as well. So let's explore each of these. Concrete and classroom-based. Actually, as I heard at this conference last year, I can't remember who said it, unfortunately. That's how I tend to work. I remember the thing, not the who. But somebody said at the conference last year in one of the panel discussions, I think, there is a difference between I know how to do it, I can do it, and I do it regularly. And so professional development needs to be about doing it. Because we can, as great as conferences are, we can sit here and talk about and think about doing it forever. But can we transfer that into the actual doing of it? Making it happen regularly. So I think that's a really important aspect, that we need to make sure that we root our professional development in what actually happens in the classroom for teachers. And there are lots of different ways we can do that. It's things like peer observation programs, it's action research, it's reflective journals and diaries. Did that work? Why didn't that work? What could I do differently? So it is that reflective element that someone here mentioned. It's case studies, exploring them, understanding them, thinking about how you would do it differently if that were you. It's role plays. So let's act this out, because we can't always practice everything in the classroom. Sometimes we are in this environment or in workshop environments. Well, let's role play how it would work in class. So we're thinking about the classroom all the time. So that's the first point. Outside expertise. It doesn't have to be global outside expertise. It could be the teacher next door. It could be the school down the road. But it equally could be global expertise. And the internet, of course, has given us a wonderful tool to access expertise from anywhere and everywhere. People in very similar environments and people in very different environments. And that gives us the opportunity to think, to reflect, to share, to collaborate, which is all very important. Next point, choice. Who here likes the strawberry cream in a chocolate box? Is that your favourite? Okay. Who likes the coffee cream or the coffee flavoured chocolate? Yeah, some of you. Who likes the caramel? Now, you all like different varieties. If you all had to eat the strawberry cream, whether you liked it or not, I would be disappointed. If you gave me a box of chocolates and it was all strawberry creams, I'd be very grateful for the box of chocolates, but I wouldn't be quite as pleased as if you'd given me a box of caramel chocolates, because they're my favourites. So we do need that element of choice. Well, which one do I want? Which one is right for me? Because which way do I like? But equally, which one is right for me today because I feel like it? And tomorrow I might feel like something a bit different. So that element of choice in professional development is essential. However, what's really interesting is that if left to their own devices, teachers are not always good at making a choice. Or if the choice is too broad, it's a bit daunting, it's a bit scary. So there needs to be a choice, but there needs to be guidance and support in those choices. It's a little bit like saying to a child, do you want vegetables? Or which vegetable do you want? None. You've got to say, do you want carrots or broccoli? We know that both of those are good for them, so now you choose. Do you want vegetables? No. Well, that's not good for them. So we've got to control or guide that choice process for teachers. And I think there was somebody here at the front mentioned that if you don't know what's out there, how do you know what you don't know, and how do you know what to choose or not choose? So we need to support that process a little bit. I've already touched on, started to talk about collaboration, and that the internet is a wonderful way to allow for collaboration. Teaching is quite lonely. You're in your classroom with your students, in your own little world. It's really important to allow teachers the opportunity to connect and share with their colleagues. And those colleagues can be the room next door, the school down the road, or across a whole country, or globally. But it is an important part of developing, is that sharing and reflecting. Because sometimes you might be doing something that's absolutely right, but how do you know that you are? Okay, it might work, sort of. So again, if I go back to my snowboarding story, maybe sometimes I kind of got it right and had a little bit of success. But unless someone was telling me, you're doing the right thing, or I knew to reflect and go, okay, that worked, but that didn't, so then I need to make sure I do that and not that, then I'm not going to remember to do it again, or know that I should do it again next time. So that checking in and sharing and collaborating is essential. Mentoring and coaching. Again, a little bit like the need for choice and a little bit of guidance around that. Mentoring and coaching is a way of guiding and supporting teachers through what's out there, what's available. A mentor doesn't have to be somebody that says, this is how you do it. A mentor or a coach can be somebody that just asks questions, that gets the teacher thinking. You know, oh, is this, maybe I should think about it a different way. Do you do it that way or did it work that way? What about thinking about it from this perspective? So it's not that the mentor or the coach is right and the knower of everything. It's just having that one-on-one connection point with somebody. And the beauty about coaching and mentoring is it's a two-way street. The person who is being coached or mentored will get a lot from that relationship, but the mentor or the coach will also develop and get a lot from that relationship. So there's definite double benefits in mentoring and coaching as a way of professional development successfully. And the other thing is, as I mentioned, one doesn't have to be the expert. It can almost be a buddy system. Because any two people, we talked about diversity yesterday, they'll come with different perspectives, different life experiences, different takes on things. So one doesn't necessarily have to be up here and the other here in the learning process. They can actually be even because they will look at things from different angles and help each other. Developing is a long road. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Again, snowboarding, I did make progress that second time round, but I needed to keep going. I've now stopped going, and I know that if I put a snowboard on now and tried to go down a mountain, I would have gone backwards. And I would have had to start, maybe not at the very beginning, but I'd certainly have to relearn to get to where I was before. So it's an ongoing, long process. Change doesn't happen overnight. We have to try something, think about it, fiddle with it a little bit, try again, think about it some more, go back, try it slightly differently. It's that ongoing process, that never-ending journey. And sometimes the thought of a never-ending journey can feel a little bit depressing. Oh, am I never going to be perfect? Am I never going to get there? But if we think about it as just continually learning new skills and adding to ourselves, that's a positive thing. A little bit like cross-stitch, maybe. You probably learnt some basics. Oh, I can do this. And then learnt something a bit fancier. Oh, I can do this now. And the same with swimming. Oh, I can do the basics. Great. Oh, now I can do a fancier thing. And maybe I can even do backstroke. So we're constantly building and developing over a long period of time. And the last of the points to touch on here is that support. You need infrastructure for professional development to be effective. So if the school that teachers are in doesn't support professional development, it's harder for that teacher to make progress. So you need to engage with the hierarchy about what you're doing. If you're doing your own professional development, somehow getting that engagement with the heads or the headmaster or the seniors or the coordinators is a really important part of achieving success. Doing it on your own is an uphill battle. Doesn't mean that you can't develop, but doing it with that support is much better. And it might be just simple things like them saying, well, why don't you share what you're learning with the others? Because everyone would value that. So it can be very, very simple things. It doesn't have to be, you can have 3 weeks to go off and travel to America and study. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be a very simple thing of just acknowledging that that's of value to the school and to the other teachers in the school. All right. So those are the 7 factors that I wanted to talk about. So before I go any further, I want you to take a moment and think about those 3 questions. So we talked about your personal development before, but now I want you to start thinking about professional development. What professional development have you been involved in, as a participant or as a provider that have included those factors? Was it successful? And which of the factors resonates most with you? Either because you realize, that's missing in my environment, or I know that's the most important because I've had this success when we included it. So which ones strike a chord or resonate most with you? Chat for just a couple of minutes. All right. I'm particularly interested in that last point. Which of those factors resonate most with you? Did you get to that question, to that discussion point? Which of the 7 factors hit you hardest or make you think, we need to be doing more of that, or that's actually a really good point? Anyone want to share? Yeah. The coaching and the mentoring? Any particular reason?
Sometimes we get confused, and during the mentoring process, we focus on a particular problem and get solution for that, and then we try. Then that particular area of development, we overcome that effect.
Okay, so very focused on problem solution rather than just natural sort of
because giving
development.
general feedback is is of no use. But if we focus on a particular in a very critical way, then we say, okay, this is the plus point, this is the minus point, and this area of this area you need some more practice. Then we get properly mentored.
Okay, okay. It's interesting that the mentoring coaching thing has come out, because I remember being told a story about a tennis coach who had a slightly different approach to how he coached. So, for example, if the person he was working with was having trouble with their backhand, the natural thing would be to focus on the backhand, to really work on that backhand and to really pay attention to that backhand. But what this coach found was that it was better to say, let's not focus on the backhand, let's focus on getting the ball into that spot there, and let's just concentrate on that out there, getting the ball to that goal, and then focus on that, and then actually the backhand would fix itself. Because if you focus too much on the problem, you can get all tied up in that problem. And what you need to do is look at where you want to be or where you're trying to get to and focus on that rather than, I have this problem. Yeah? So putting yourself out there, and the coach can really help you think outside of the problem and think beyond the problem to where you're trying to get to and help you get there. Yeah? Any other of those factors? Yes, sir.
I also think a mentor plays a very, very important role. Just one instance, she talked about her swimming experience. So once the mentor changed, her whole experience of learning it changed. It happened to me also. I worked for almost 3 decades as a teacher. And before the first 2 decades was what Penny said, 20 years, 20 times the same experience. But there was a mentor who made a whole difference to me. And then my last 10 years was certainly and completely different from what I did earlier.
That's
and
interesting.
It was because of one gentleman who made all that difference.
Yeah, that's lovely. And it can be out of the blue that experience happens. That's good. That's amazing. Obviously, mentoring is quite an expensive process. Not everybody can have a one-on-one mentor. It's a bit of a luxury. But if we are lucky enough for that to happen somehow, then that's fantastic. Sir?
Yeah. All these factors are important for professional development, but support, I believe, to my mind, actually it is very, very important. And when I talk about support, I would like to mention about the support of colleagues, which is very important, with whom you have certain amount of compatibility with regard to professional development. So you cannot grow alone. Working in certain departments, it becomes very difficult to move ahead, to grow alone. When you have certain amount of support coming from your colleagues, you go ahead, you have promotion of your professional development going very smooth.
Exactly. So it's that support which makes all the difference, and that's what you really believe and what helps you. And again, everybody is a bit different. So for some people, it might be the support of the infrastructure. Somebody else, it might be that one-on-one. Somebody else, it might be actually being left to their own a little bit more and having some choice about where they go. Because we are all different and we all learn in different ways and need different kinds of support and input and opportunities.
How do we account for the people who did not have any of these 10 factors working in their lives, but still succeeded enormously in their lives? They were miraculous successes, great writers, great painters, great sculptors. I don't think they had any of these 7 factors working in their lives.
I think that something is, one or more of those is probably there in some way, shape or form. So whether it's the opportunity to sit around a cafe with other writers and talk about ideas, or to walk around an art gallery and look at other paintings or other sculptors, I think that's an element of collaboration, I guess. It's maybe passive collaboration, but there's still an element of collaboration there. So I think those factors, when you have success, those factors are usually there in some shape or form. Maybe not very strongly, but there. And then, maybe there are always exceptions to rules, as there are in the English language. There's always something that trips us up and throws us off balance, and we have to say, well, lucky them. Yeah. But I think self-motivation also comes into it. If I think of myself on that mountain, if I had been absolutely determined to learn how to snowboard on that first trip, maybe I would have got there if I'd sat and watched the other people and looked. Maybe I would have gone and asked someone for help eventually. But then that's getting support or coaching or mentoring. But if I'd been determined enough, I would have probably found one of those factors to bring in some way, shape or form. Okay. What I want to just touch on now, briefly before the last part of the session, is how Oxford University Press can support in effective professional development and what we can do to provide that effective professional development. So here are 4 areas that I want to talk about. Who here in this room has been involved in one or more of these elements with OUP? Either you already have an OUP professional development book on your shelf, maybe you've taken part in a webinar. Put your hand up if you've been involved in some way. Some of you, is it books? Keep your hand up if it's books. Webinars. A few of you. Yeah. What about social media? Oh, excellent. And Teachers Club, the Oxford Teachers Club. A few of you. Okay, I'm just going to touch on each of them in a little bit more detail, and then we'll move on to another section. Our teach development titles have been around for a very long time. We've got new ones coming out all the time, but we now have them in ebook format as well. So rather than that big bag of books you've got to carry around, you can have it on your computer, on a tablet, etc. So much easier to access. New titles coming out, 4th edition of How Languages Are Learnt, Technology-Enhanced Language Learning, obviously a hot topic in this day and age, and Input, Interaction and Corrective Feedback is just out as well. So always new titles on trend, looking at what's going on globally. A useful way of feeding into things like action research, feeding into share groups. So you may be reading a book, great, but how about you start a discussion group about it? Talk about what you're reading in that book. Share with others what you're reading in that book. So it becomes collaborative rather than just individual. The Oxford Teachers Club. Thousands of activities. Great for newer teachers. Very practical, very classroom-based. So if we're going back to that aspect, take an idea, try it out, see how it works, feedback to your colleagues. Oh, I didn't like this worked, this was great. I changed it this way. I found it worked better when I added this on the end in my class. And share that with others. And if you're a mentor or a coach, you can be trying out those things and then reflecting on it with whoever you're mentoring or coaching. Social media. a few facts and figures here, but before I reveal those facts and figures, in the past couple of weeks, there have been blogs about teaching critical thinking skills, teaching reading to young learners, and an article about asking the question, is technology changing too quickly? Who here thinks that technology is changing too quickly? I think I'm holding on with my fingernails most days. There's been a live Facebook discussion on making the most of big, small, and mixed ability classes. There's been a link through Facebook to an article about encouraging engagement with students outside the classroom without straying into their personal lives. And there's been some material that you can download and use about the Chinese New Year. Obviously, that's now out of date because the Chinese New Year has passed, but we do put topical, relevant things up there. Through our social media, we've also launched the Global Sing-Along 2013. So YouTube hosts the video entries. And you can use material for lessons whether you enter into the competition or not. It's for young learners, that one. And there's also a number of videos that have gone up on YouTube to support the Big Read competition. Again, offering both materials and ideas for teachers to either use in class or to get them thinking and reflecting about best practice and methodology. On Twitter, we have the word of the day, so you could learn things like scrap or frolic or musty and figure out what they mean if you don't already know. There's also links to external resources like 7 online quiz tools for the classroom. And then we also engage with other ELT professionals such as yourselves on all sorts of topics, things like mixed ability classes, different learning styles, ELT career paths, all sorts of different topics. In Twitter in particular, it's through #ELTchat, which is a professional discussion group that just gets on every week and talks about different issues in ELT. So we're very active and engaged and involved in what's going on out there, and there's a load of resources to get at and to actively seek out, but equally there are great opportunities for you to offer and put forward and share what you're learning or what your teachers are learning. We've got over 9,000 followers on Twitter, so 9,000 other ELT professionals out there engaging and talking. 44,000 people on our Facebook community, and that's growing rapidly. 340 YouTube videos, most of them issue-based and looking at methodology or practical classroom ideas, tips and techniques for teachers. And there's over 300 blog articles to read and ask questions and comment on. So a huge resource sitting there waiting to be tapped into that feed into this idea of choice, collaboration, support. All of those elements come through in this activity that we have. And some of you raised your hand when I asked about webinars. Webinars are obviously the thing of the moment. Everyone's talking about webinars. But they really are a great opportunity to connect with other teachers and other educators, and with authors and experts as well. And the beauty about them, depending on where you do it, but if you do it at home, you can do it in your pajamas with a cup of tea. You don't even have to put your face on or do your hair. You can just sit there with your slippers, your pajamas, and learn and develop and connect with other people. I do promise that our presenters usually are not in their pajamas. If they are, they're only in the pajamas from the bottom down. We do make them wear normal clothes from the top up. But you can go and find out more about the webinar program and all sorts of different topics coming up. We've got teaching reading and young learners classes coming up. We've got errors and error correction coming up with Robin Walker. We've got teacher values and teacher stories coming up in April. And teaching integrated skills early May. So lots of different topics for different kinds of teachers and teacher educators. And how many of you know about the ELT Journal? Some of you do? Great. A really rich resource of articles. And you can access that, read, again, use that information to feed back into mentoring and coaching, to feed back into workshops that you're running, to feed back into discussion groups with teachers, to set homework. You know, to say to a group of teachers, choose one article, go away and read it, come back and talk about how it impacts on your classroom and share it with a group. So lots of ways to bring it to life and make it something that's classroom-based, to give it choice, etc. The latest edition includes articles on encouraging out-of-class study. It includes articles on assessment of narrative writing, storyline tasks for young learners. So again, a real range of things in there for all sorts of different interests, different kinds of teachers. And equally, there's currently a call for papers for a special edition that will be published in 2014, which is on teaching English to young learners. So all of you could be thinking about submitting articles yourself based on your experiences, based on what you have learned and how you have developed. And you can go along to Keith Morrow's coffee shop session in the main hall this afternoon to learn more about how to write for journals. Because just as much as reading this stuff is useful and a useful professional development tool, thinking about and writing and putting it into a paper is an equally effective professional development tool. And then you're sharing, you're collaborating, you're mentoring, you're coaching other people beyond you. So that's a useful tool. And then, of course, as a one-stop shop, you can go to the Professional Development Hub on oup.com/ELT, and that will link you off to all of these other things that I've been talking about. And keep an eye out on that as we develop that further over the coming months. But that's a great hub to go to then go off and find other places for you yourself or to direct your teachers to. Okay. What I want to focus on now is not frogs, but almost. We all talk about life cycle of frogs. We probably all taught that lesson at least once in our lives, if not 100 times. Well, we have a life cycle as well. As teachers and as professional educators, we all have a life cycle. And what kind of professional development we need will depend on where we are in our professional life cycle. And it will vary. So I'm going to refer now to some terms that were coined by Huberman in a study that he did in, I think it was some time ago now, in the early to mid-80s, where he labeled the stages in the professional life cycle of teachers. And if you start at the top there, survival. Do you all remember your survival stage? I definitely do, where you're just desperate to get through each lesson that you have to teach and hope that the world doesn't collapse around you as you do so. So I think that's a scary time for teachers. And there I think that classroom-based professional development is really, really important because we need to help them with the everyday. There's no point talking about these grand ideologies and theories out here because, how do I do this today with this group of students? How do I do it without being sick or running out of the room in tears? How do I get through today? So we need to think about what is the right professional development for those teachers in that moment. I think also, on a more positive slant, it can be that discovery phase. So if they have the right support, it becomes a little bit less about surviving and a little bit more about discovering, which is more positive. But they do need that support in order for it to be that way rather than all negative. And it's also, I think, a bit of a reality shock. In your pre-service training, you maybe have to prepare a lesson, and you spend hours and hours and hours and hours preparing this wonderful lesson. And then reality is you have to churn out loads and loads and loads of those, and you think, and you worry about your standards. You realize that your standards have to slip in order to churn out the number that you need to churn out. So it's a bit of a reality check, which is a bit scary. Then we go into the stabilization. Some people leave before they get there. Stabilization tends to be when we commit to teaching. Actually, you know what? I quite like this. This is what I want to do. I think people think they want to do it, and then they hit survival and go, oh, maybe not. So that's when we settle into it a little bit more and feel a little bit more sure of ourselves. I think I can do this job, and I think I mostly like it. Mostly. Then we go into that experiment and reassessment phase, and that's exciting. That's when we start to question the things that we were doing back here. Oh, why was I doing that? That's not the best of things to do. Or why am I still doing this? Maybe I need to think about doing this a different way. Because now I'm strong enough and stable enough to know that my world isn't going to crumble if I change something slightly. So we experiment, we reassess, we try things out. So that's a nice phase to be in. So the kind of professional development that's needed there is very different from the survival professional development. It might be more about choice here, making that choice. And it can be more about that collaboration, sharing with others. Oh, I tried this, what do you think? Oh, I like that idea, I'll give that a go. So it's that element that can come into play more strongly. And then serenity. I know what I'm doing. I'm quite good at it. I've experimented, I've tried some things out, but I know what works in my classroom. I know what works for my students. I know what works for me. So that's a pretty good positive phase to be in again. We're quite relaxed, we're quite confident. So this is where maybe that mentoring and coaching role can come in. So you're feeling pretty good about what you're doing. How about you share some of that with somebody or support somebody else through their earlier stages? Then we go into conservatism. Well, you see, I know what's right. I know what works, so I'm not going to change it. This new technology thing, I can teach my classes perfectly well without it. Why on earth would I want to change? Yeah, do you recognize a bit of that? Either in yourself or with some people that you work with, maybe? Yeah. So, again, professional development that needs to come through needs to tread carefully, because the harder you push, sometimes the harder the pushback. If you force me down this direction, the more I'll fold my arms and say, no way. So again, it's about that choice aspect, and possibly again about that mentoring and coaching to break them out of the norm a little bit, getting them to think about different ways of doing things. And then, possibly, unfortunately, disengagement. How many more years till I retire? Yeah? Oh, I don't really care anymore. There's another new thing. I'm not interested, just going through the motions. So what can we do for those teachers? How can we keep them engaged? How can we keep them motivated? So just take a couple of minutes again with a partner. The 7 factors we talked about before, and those stages of a teacher's life, professional life cycle, which are more important when for you? And you can also think about the different activities. Are observations good then? Are action research things good then? Is it attending conferences that's important? Think about all of those things together. What's good when for who? Take a moment. Yes, please. This presentation, I think that will be possible. I will pass it to the organisers. I think that's how it works. And then they make it available through Facebook, I think. I think that's how it works. And the website as well. Thank you. Okay, any thoughts on which factors are most important when? Sir at the back? This gentleman up here is just going to respond first. I'll come back to you, sir.
So there are 7 colors in a rainbow, 7 wonders in the world, 7 heavens are there, 7 seas, 7 continents, 7 weeks are there, 7 days are there in a week, and the 7 factors are all equally important because the rainbow we can't make a rainbow complete.
I like that a lot. And do you know, when I was preparing my presentation, I was playing around with the idea of the 7 wonders of the natural world as a context, and then I couldn't quite get there, so I abandoned it. But that's exactly a very good point, a very good point. Thank you very much. We cannot recreate the rainbow with different colours, so they're all equally important. So you had...
For the rainbow to be there, there must be a little rain also, and that's why these are prepared.
A little rain also, I like that too, I like that too. Yes, sir.
I think experiment and reassessment is quite important.
Experiment and reassessment, that phase.
Because unless you do experiment and reassessment, there will be no development. You will become monotonous, and though you may be in a belief that there is development, there is no development at all.
That is very true. And what's interesting, though, is that when you're in that survival stage, if you're being pushed to experiment and reassess, it might be dangerous because actually you've got enough on your plate just learning the basics. So experiment and reassessment is essential, but at certain phases and points. At other points, it is about survival. And I showed you this as one comes after the other, and when we talk about the life cycle of frog, yes, one comes after the other and you can't go backwards. But actually, with teachers, you do go backwards. And in this day and age with technology, that's a classic example of teachers that might be here, 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 or anywhere on this cycle, suddenly thrown back to here. Because you have to start again. There's a whole new world out there that you have to learn. Or maybe they've changed their teaching context, so they've gone from primary to secondary, or something like that. So it's, I have to start again. Yeah? Any other comments in relation to that discussion task? Please.
It would be great to have more choices. I mean, I find this very much in teacher training and having been both receiving and giving, that when people have a sense of choices that they can do more putting themselves into the classroom with their students rather than having to conform to a particular role, because I think that's what also gives you the feeling that you can't grow.
Yes. So it's that ownership, that choice, that this is about me and my students, not something that somebody up there is inflicting on me. And I think that's really important. And I talked about outside expertise being important, and I forgot to mention actually that only works if it's respectful and if it takes into account the particular context and environment that those teachers or that individual is working in. It's no good having this person out here say, oh, you should do this, when the reality is this is just not feasible in that teaching circumstance, in that context. So that outside expertise needs to be a respectful relationship, and that again goes two ways. And I think that element of choice is really very important, a very important part of it, because none of us like being told what to do. We all like to feel that we've had some engagement in where we're going and what we're doing and how we're moving forward. All right, just to close, I particularly liked this quote. I was also doing some reading around the topic, and I stumbled upon that and thought I quite liked that. And I think it links in very well to what you were just saying. Thank you very much. And I'm now happy to open the floor to any further questions. Yes?
in the life cycle of the teacher, you may not necessarily follow the cycle. You may just jump. Now that could be a natural course, or it could be just that you leaped. So for example, I may, after survival, stabilization, and experiment, I may straight reach conservatism. Or I may reach the stage of disengagement way too soon.
Yes.
So what do we do for teachers in the last two stages of that cycle? I mean, which are not really in the last two stages, but if we go clockwise.
Yeah, I think there is no time frame to this. So yes, I think people can end up in a cycle far quicker than somebody else. Just because you've been in the industry 20 years doesn't mean that you're automatically there. I think it varies on the individual, it varies on the environment and what impact that has on them as individuals, and how much support they're getting. You can become disengaged quite quickly because of where you're working. And if you change for some reason or another and go somewhere else, you might find yourself over here because the environment really supports and encourages that. So I think it's about creating environments that support this end and challenge in a positive way rather than an aggressive, you must change way. Challenges this side will help us keep over here more than at this point. And I think it's also about our own attitude, and it's about reminding ourselves to be open and to be willing, and acknowledging that that learning journey never ends. And if you are being honest with yourself and saying, I'm here, well, what do I need to do to break out of this? How do I get my spark back? And it's by coming to things like this and being, oh, there's an idea. Let me go and play with that a bit. I haven't heard, that's just sparked my interest. It's reading things, it's communicating, it's connecting, it's getting online. And if that's not your thing, there are different ways of doing that. So if you don't like the online world, you can do it through conferences and workshops and communities. So I think it's challenging that and encouraging that environment. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's extremely, can you hear me? It's extremely interesting. My question is about this life cycle again. For example, if we look at the example of English as a foreign language, for example, in a developing countries where learners, even at university level, at the English department, study English, and where we don't have pre-service teacher training. So where students are mostly engaged, they mostly engage in learning English as proficiency. So in that case, after they finish, they straightly go teaching, start teaching immediately. And for example, after that, novice teachers go to in-service teacher training program. For example, let's say in methodology, whatever. Then with them, for example, sometimes it happens that students get stagnated and fossilized in their development. So in that case, if there is no any intervention, any input, because there are, old books, like from the Soviet Union, for example, Central Asian countries, and even the syllabus is quite old. So where is the possibility that they get stagnated or fossilized?
Well, I think you can stagnate, here, really very early. I think most people move out of survival at some point with varying levels of skills and knowledge, and so you'll have people who are better equipped and worse equipped than each other at this stage, but where they feel, this is all right, I'm managing. And so I think that is where the first risk of stagnation and fossilization can happen. So I think very early on, we need to be starting to just poke and prod and encourage out of that pattern of behavior that might not be positive. Gentleman at the back there, you were next.
Yeah, I think, this cycle is very true for all the professions, not only teachers. And I also feel that one goes through this cycle multiple times in their professional life.
Absolutely.
It's not like that you in a 40 or 30 years career. Maybe there are phases that you pass through all these stages.
Agreed.
So that's I think is quite convincing about this cycle.
I think if I asked you all, you could put yourselves somewhere.
Exactly. In fact, the first thing we did is we asked ourselves, so I feel
where
I'm
am
at
I?
this stage, you know, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is important. It's not just the teachers that you're working with, it's yourself as well, and it's acknowledging to yourself about what you need to think about and do. And yeah, whenever you learn something new, you're sort of going through that same process. It's like a mini cycle of this bigger cycle, indeed. Yes, sir.
But it's wrong, I think. It's not cyclical.
No.
Because we end with the disengagement. After that, we don't go to survival.
No, yes, I guess that there isn't an arrow that, well, it depends on what happens. We might go back to survival if someone throws us into a new environment or where we need to learn a new thing. So I think there are sort of lots of mini circles, but you're right, it's not a perfect circle, most definitely. Yes, I think that's probably our last one.
It's just a comment because whatever he's saying, like, yes, it might lead to survival because your job might be at stage if you're disengaged, fine. So if you're disengaged, as a consequence, it might throw you to survival as well.
That is very true. You might have to learn for a new environment or start again because you realize that your job is at risk.
Yes.
And you need to get stuck in. Lots of questions. I'm running out of time. Okay, gentleman at the back.
Just I want to say that how I survived. In the stage of survival, actually I was helping my brother and sisters in their studies, and also for that time being I was unable to develop my profession. So it took 10 years to come from survival stage to the stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have struggled a lot, and I'm speaking with you and I'm here. I think it's the stabilization stage, and I have to do many experiments, and
that's next for you.
Yeah.
Do you know, that's very
Thank you.
honest of you, sir. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, because I think we think of that survival thing as just being the first little bit. But actually, for many of us, especially if you really care about what you do, which I'm sure you've come along to this conference, you're all professionals who do care about what you do, there's an element of, am I getting it right? Am I doing okay? At all times, that stays with you. Whether you're teaching a group of students or working with a group of teachers or giving a presentation at a conference, there's always that degree of, and there is an element of, that is, that's a survival bit, but I think that shows that we care, and so I think that shows that the length of time you've spent in that phase is testament to how much you want to do well and you want to get it right. And so I hope that now that you're here, you can really enjoy this phase and really get stuck in and have fun with that, because I think that is a really enjoyable stage. I am going to draw it to a close. I'm very sorry. If you do want to ask me more questions now that we're finished, feel free to come up and have a chat with me. But thank you all very much for your participation and involvement, and I look forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank everybody and thank Naomi in particular. We have a little gift for Naomi from the British Council.